Why did I start that like an apology video? I promised myself about a decade ago that I was never, ever going to make a Five Nights at Freddy's video, but, here we are. Hi. So about 2 weeks ago from the time I'm recording this, we had the release of Five Nights at Freddy's the week before, which had a ton of lore-relevant information to it. Like, Phone Guy is Ralph now? Incredible! But there were some things in the book, like with every bit of FNAF media, that brought up more questions than it actually answered, such as the repetition of "It's me," which I do have some thoughts on, but that is way beyond the scope of this video. What I really want to talk about today is the question that's been raised recently of when does this book take place? We obviously know from the title that it takes place the week before, which is basically confirmed to mean the week before the events of Five Nights at Freddy's 1. So that begs the question, when does FNAF 1 take place? Well, that's an easy one. 1993! Oh. Shoot. Yeah, okay, so we're gonna have to break this down. Okay, so the earliest and most common theory that we have is that Five Nights at Freddy's 1 takes place in 1993. This conclusion was come to by MatPat in his first game theory video on the franchise. He came to this conclusion by calculating minimum wage in the US and comparing that to the paycheck you receive at the end of Night 5. Now, there is a range of dates this could be, as the minimum wage between 1990 and 1996 didn't change. But he settled on 1993 because, reasons.
This story is the one that inspired Five Nights at Freddy's.
I don't think so, Tim.
To be fair, that's not the only reason. It makes sense because the paycheck you receive at the end of the game has a date of 11/12. And in 1993, that date fell on a Friday, and Friday is a common day when you would receive your paycheck. Okay, cool, so yeah, this was the date that everyone chose to run with. And then Five Nights at Freddy's 2 dropped like 2 days later or something. And this time, not only do we have a specific year to work with, being 1987, but the Night 5 paycheck matches the minimum wage for 1987 exactly. So this time we have the specific date of 11/12/1987. Cool, let's just throw that into Google and... oh. Okay, yeah, we should probably apply some consistency here. So the work week with Fazbear Entertainment, according to the only solid date we have, runs from Sunday to Thursday. We can apply the Sunday through Thursday work week with the date range we have from FNAF 1, and the only year in that date range that matches a Sunday through Thursday work week exactly is 1992. You could also make the argument that, oh, after the FNAF 2 location closed, Fazbear Entertainment restructured their payments, so now it's Monday through Friday. Which, like, you could, but, like, why? Also, if in both games 11/12 falls on a Thursday, that would make the next day... Now that's spooky. There are also people who say, oh, Scott just made a mistake, and then they just stick with 1993, which, like, we could do that if all we had was FNAF 1, but I think throwing out the only solid date we have with 1987, and with that throwing out the consistency we have, I think that's a little disingenuous. In any case, Occam's razor is a very important concept, and we can choose to use that here, and that gives us 1992. Unfortunately, a lot of people will base their timelines off of FNAF 1 taking place in 1993. They build off of that with FNAF 3 taking place 30 years after the establishment closed, which is a whole other thing that I don't want to get into because it's beyond the scope of this video. So it's 1992, right? Well, keep in mind that we have a range of dates to work with, and as much as we can speculate based on what evidence we have, we just don't have a solid date because that paycheck year is just not there. Enter the week before. This book is magical. I want to say right off the bat, I haven't read a book that has put me this in touch with a main character in a very long time. And this is Funny Jump Scare Bear book! It has absolutely no business being this good. But it is. That being said, there were some unforeseen lore drops that came with this book. Like we said before, it's basically confirmed that the week before means the week before Five Nights at Freddy's 1. At worst, it's strongly implied, but we can basically draw that conclusion, even if we don't have a post-credit scene where Mike rolls up to his first day on the job. But we can still say 1992, right? I mean, we could, but there are some problems with that now. Listen, with a franchise like this, can you really expect anything else when coming to lore conclusions? I mean, just look at these thumbnails. In the book, we have a few indications of when it takes place by various pop culture references made by the characters, so at least we have that to go off of. For instance, Ralph lets his daughter Capella read Lord of the Rings. So, good news gamers, we can determine that this takes place after 1953. This may be earth-shattering information for some of you out there, but I promise we will get through it together. I was originally going to memorize all of these and then recite them on the video, but I don't want to do that, so we're going to read them off my phone. I'm pretty sure I got all of them, or at the very least most of them that are pertinent. So we have a reference to Dirty Harry from 1971, Raiders of the Lost Ark from 1981, Dunkin' Donuts commercial from 1984, Back to the Future 1985, The Lost Boys and Spaceballs, both 1987, and the Sega Genesis, which released in 1989. And I'm pretty sure that's as far into the future as the pop culture references go. There are the Lethal Weapon movies which are also referenced, but it's never specified how many were made because there's like a lot. What are we talking about again? So yeah, this is about as far as the pop culture references take us. So far, this fits with our timeline of 1992. But we start looking at some more information from the books, and there are a few more issues that start to pop up. On the first page of Night 1, we are told that Capella, who's Ralph's daughter, is 11 years old, and later on in the book, we're told that she has a birthday coming up next month, and if we take the date from the FNAF 1 paycheck, being November, that would mean her birthday is in December. We're also told that Ralph was working at Freddy's around the time that Capella was born, and that's kind of our first problem. We can assume from evidence elsewhere in the series that Freddy Fazbear's Pizza originally opened in 1983. The Faz coin says established 1983. I think that's a pretty safe bet. This means a couple things, okay? First of all, Ralph has been working with the company for at least 11 years. But it also means that if we stick with our 1992 timeline, or even our 1993 timeline to be realistic, it doesn't really fit. That would mean the absolute earliest this could take place is 1994. But even that's iffy, because the FNAF 4 minigames, which take place in 1983, the same year Freddy's was established, they seem to take place in the springtime. Hey, so slight correction. It is 1000% not spring, it is definitely summer. Mr. Hippo says summer in his speech, and it makes sense because the kids aren't, in school, they're out and about and, at Freddy's and such. So, anytime I say spring in this video, replace it with summer in your heads because it doesn't change the point. And if Capella wasn't born until December, I would argue that 1995 even is the earliest it could take place. Everyone's dressed in very mild clothes or clothes for mild weather. At the very least, it doesn't indicate to me late fall, early spring. But we also get an Ultimate Custom Night speech from Mr. Hippo where he talks about...
It reminds me of one summer day in the park. I was having just a delightful picnic with my good friend Orville.
That specific speech is very strongly considered to be pointing towards FNAF 4. So that's just where I'm coming from with that. Okay, back to the rest of my rambling. There are also people who try to argue for dates like 1998 or 1999, but honestly, we can just rule those out based on the minimum wage alone. And you could argue that Fazbear Entertainment would ignore minimum wage laws, which I am inclined to agree with, but you look at FNAF 2 and they paid Jeremy Fitzgerald exactly minimum wage. So, not even Fazbear is immune to national wage law. Fortunately, this can be explained away by the fact that Fazbear Entertainment itself, not Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, was most likely founded pre-1983, as it was most likely the corporate body that was in charge of things like Fredbear's Family Diner and all of its intellectual properties, that kind of thing. But even that still has issues, because in the FNAF 2 phone calls, Ralph talks about how he barely remembers Fredbear's Family Diner when he's trying to contact the owner.
We're going to try to contact the original restaurant owner. I think the name of the place was Fredbear's Family Diner or something like that. It was closed for years, though. I doubt we'll be able to track anybody down.
That wouldn't really make sense because with the evidence we have, Fredbear's and Freddy's were open at the same time, at least for a short while. Are you overwhelmed yet? Don't worry, because it gets worse. Because in the first phone call of FNAF 1, Ralph says,
If I were forced to sing those same stupid songs for 20 years and I never got a bath, I'd probably be a bit irritable at night, too.
20 years? Obviously, he could be using hyperbole to prove a point, but if we want to be true FNAF theorists, we have to take every word of this franchise at face value every time. 20 years! Now, with the assumption that Freddy's opened in 1983, that puts us in 2003. Yeah, no, that's just objectively incorrect. And that brings us to the crux of this issue. We can't take every word of this book as data to be fit into our timelines. And I'm not saying that in the sense of, oh, we shouldn't just because we don't have enough info. No, we have the info, but we can't fit it in. It's impossible. Maybe not impossible, but the lengths that FNAF theorists will go to fit every peg into the square hole, honestly, is baffling.
We know what hole that goes
The
into,
triangle.
right?
Triangle.
That's right, the square hole.
Let me explain why this wouldn't work. If we want to go with 1993 or even 1992, that would put Capellia's birth around 1981 or 1982. We can actually make that work with the line about Ralph not wanting to work the night shift because Capellia had just been born. We know from the rest of the book that Capellia's mother isn't exactly in the picture, so it's fairly safe to assume that Ralph wouldn't want to go off to work the night shift while raising a toddler. The issue here is the recency to Fredbear's Family Diner, because we know that Ralph is very devoted to his work with Fazbear Entertainment. It doesn't really make sense that he would not confidently remember the establishment at all. It's also weird that if Fredbear's didn't close until at least 1983, he wouldn't even remember the owner's name. Unless it's not actually Henry who owned it like we've been speculating this whole time. It just doesn't make sense that he wouldn't remember Fredbear's much at all, especially if it was that recent to when he started working there. Okay, so what if we take that date and we push it back to 94 or 95 for when it takes place? Well, that would actually work better with the Capellia was just born line, as well as it still fits into our minimum wage range for FNAF 1. However, that would put our paycheck dates in a really questionable spot, because a Tuesday through Saturday or a Wednesday through Sunday work week, that's just a little wacky. As well as this, we see that Capellia has school every day of the week that this takes place. So that would put it out of whack with 1994 and 1995, because you don't go to school on the weekend. So then we push the date back to 1993, and then it just starts this endless cycle of evidence and counter evidence. Maybe, and stick with me on this, maybe this book just has some continuity errors. I know, Scott doesn't do coincidences, except when he does. But Scott himself has been known to make mistakes. You remember the first FNAF 2 phone call?
Hello and welcome to your new summer job at the new and improved Freddy Fazbear's Pizza.
Yeah, that's just a mistake. The paycheck we get at the end of FNAF 2 is November. That's not in the summer. So do we have any mistakes in this book? Well, yeah. In the book, we're told that when Capellia was 7, Ralph brought her to Freddy's, and she was so spooked by the animatronics that she threw up. We're also told in the book that Ralph never brought Capellia to Freddy's. Yeah, fit that one into your timelines. Thing is, Scott is not the only author here. E.C. Myers also co-wrote this book, and on his Twitter, it's very clear that he's passionate about the source material, and he tried very hard to stick with the canon. He did a great job. To be completely honest, like I said, I cannot recommend this book enough. That being said, E.C. Myers is human, and humans make mistakes. You can try to find canon reasons on why Capellia both was and was never at Freddy's, but it's literally just an error. In this franchise, I've always been a big proponent of don't overthink everything. Mr. Hippo even warns us about that.
If you try to read into every little thing and find meaning in everything anyone says, you'll just drive yourself crazy. I had a friend do it once. Wasn't pretty. We talked about it for years. And not only that, but you'll likely end up believing something you shouldn't believe and thinking something you shouldn't think, or assuming something you shouldn't assume.
When the hippo speaks, you listen. So if this is what we're left with, when does all of this take place? Short answer, the early 90s. Yeah, I know it's not exactly satisfying to not have a clear-cut answer, but remember, we're dealing with a range of dates. Personally, I still say 1992. I think it sits really well in my brain with the consistency with the FNAF 2 paycheck. But does it really matter? I think there's a reason that the latest pop culture reference we have in the book is 1989. I think it's deliberately left open-ended, because ultimately, it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of the story. Maybe it throws off your timeline by a year or two. That doesn't significantly impact the story being told. I think there are a lot cooler things about this book than just when it takes place. But if you get so caught up in the consistency and how not every single puzzle piece fits correctly, you're gonna miss something very special to this franchise. And I know some people have even gone as far as to say, oh, this can't be canon because it doesn't fit exactly. And I think that's a shame. Give this book a chance if you haven't yet. It's well worth your time. I personally really enjoyed it, and I think you will too. I really just made a FNAF video. Bye.